In this video, we're going through how you shoot completely manual on your camera, so you can flip off auto and be able to understand the things that it takes to be able to get the image that you want. Now, this is for video creators. I teamed up with my buddy Sydney, both of us are filmmakers, and we wanted to put together a 4-part series that goes through things that you need to know as a creator, and part 1 is all about getting off of auto and shooting completely manual with your camera. If you're new to this channel, my name is Jeven Dovey. I'm an adventure filmmaker, and on this channel, you're gonna find a lot of education that's geared towards creators. If you're looking to grow your channel or just make better looking videos, then make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on those bell notifications so you don't miss one of these videos. Now, this is part 1 of a 4-part series, and this is all about shooting completely manual. And the reason that you want to shoot manual with your camera is so that you can understand what it takes to get the image that you want. Now, a lot of times I shoot auto in different settings on my camera, but I only do it because I understand why things are happening in the camera. If you're just flipping to auto color, auto exposure, auto focus, then what's gonna happen is you're not always gonna get the image that you want. Cameras are getting better and you can shoot auto a lot of the times. However, there are situations where it doesn't work right. So understanding how your camera works is super important so that you never get caught off guard and you end up with awful looking footage. Now, me and Sydney have broken this down into 5 different parts. We got shutter speed, aperture, ISO, white balance, and focus. These are the 5 things that you need to switch from auto to manual, and you're gonna use them in different situations, and we're gonna go through and explain each one, what it means, and what you need to do so that you can shoot manual using that setting. So I'm gonna hand it off to Sydney, and he's gonna start with shutter speed.
Hey guys, if you don't know me, my name is Diongzon. I'm a filmmaker on YouTube, and I also do a lot of camera gear reviews, behind the scene vlogs, as well as some travel vlogs. And so if you wanna check me out, then follow me there. All right, so what is shutter speed? Well, generally speaking, shutter speed regulates motion blur. The higher your shutter speed, then the less motion blur that you're going to see, resulting in this stuttery effect. And the lower your shutter speed, then the more motion blur that you're going to see in your footage. Now, technically speaking, shutter speed is the length of time that the image sensor inside your camera is exposed to light. And that time is represented by fractions of a second. So on your camera, you should see some sort of fraction on the camera screen. You might see a 1/50th of a second or a 1/100th of a second. If you see a fraction, that's your shutter speed. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, nerd, that's a lot of numbers. You're right, I'm sorry, let me get to the point. The whole point is that you wanna make sure that you set your shutter speed right so that you have proper motion blur. So what is proper motion blur? Well, you're seeing it right now. Right now I'm filming at 24 frames a second and I'm moving my hands and it looks normal. That's proper motion blur. Now let me crank up the shutter speed. Okay, so I've adjusted my camera where my shutter speed is now 1/250th of a second. I'm gonna move my hands and it has this very staticky effect, which can work in maybe a sports environment or an action scene, but for a normal vlog like this, it doesn't really look good. Okay, so now I've adjusted my camera to a lower shutter speed at 1/15th of a second. Now, as you can see, there's way too much motion blur and it just doesn't look very good. It's very distracting. And so let's go back to proper motion blur. Hold on. So how do you get proper motion blur? Well, there's a general rule of thumb that us filmmakers like to use, and that is to double your frame rate. So for example, I'm shooting at 24 frames a second, and so my shutter speed should be double that. Technically, it should be 1/48th of a second, but a lot of cameras don't have that option, and so 1/50th of a second is the next best thing. Same thing for slow motion. If you are shooting at 60 frames a second, then your shutter speed should be double that, so 1/120th of a second. So what's the whole point of all this? Why should you have your shutter speed set accordingly? Why is proper motion blur so important? And the reason is because you don't want to cause a distraction to the story. If you're putting a video out on YouTube and your shutter speed is cranked up all the way high, that might cause a distraction to the audience and they might miss out on the story that you're trying to tell. Same thing if you are delivering a video to a client. If they are distracted by improper motion blur or just a bad shutter speed, then they're not gonna like the video that they're going to see because it's gonna make their product and or service look really bad. And so you don't wanna cause any distractions to whatever video you make. You wanna make sure that the story is clear.
So let's get into aperture. And I think this is super important because a lot of people want to understand how you get that blurry background. And aperture is how you're going to control how the background is either sharp or it's completely out of focus. So first we need to understand what the aperture is and what it does for your camera. The aperture is basically allowing light into the sensor. So essentially what's happening is when it's wide open, when it's fully open, you're letting a ton of light into the sensor. So if you're shooting at like a 2.8, 1.7, 1.2, you're letting lots of light into your camera. And so the brighter the image is, the smaller the number is. Now, when the aperture is closed down to like pinhole size, like super tiny, that means you're not letting very much light into the sensor. Think of it like a hose. If your hose is massive, it's a big giant hose, it's gonna let a lot of water flow through. If it's a tiny hose, it's gonna not let a whole lot of water through. Same thing's happening with light and your lens. When it's wide open, a 2.8, a 1.7, a 1.2, you're letting all of this light into your sensor. Whereas if you're on f16, f22, you're letting a very little amount of light into your sensor. And you control this depending on which lighting situation you're in. So when you're outside and it's super bright, you're gonna have to be using like an f16 and f22. Whereas if you're indoors and you're in a very dimly lit situation, then something like a 2.8 is gonna make more sense. And so that's the main function of the aperture, let more or less light into the sensor. Now, a byproduct of your aperture is your focus. So the background is going to be affected by your aperture. If you want to get that super shallow depth of field, you need to shoot at wide open apertures. You need to shoot where you're letting a ton of light into the sensor. Now that's gonna cause problems because if you're in sunlight and you're at a 1.7, you're letting a ton of light into the sensor. So you're gonna have to use other functions to be able to control your exposure so you're not overexposing. And the same thing, if you're in a darker setting and you're shooting at an f22, you're gonna have to use something like your ISO to boost it so that you can actually get an exposure and it's not super dark. So the main thing that you need to take away from this is that your aperture is gonna control how bright your image is. And if you want more shallow depth of field, you want that blurry background, you need to shoot at wide open apertures. Now this will be easy in darker situations because in darker situations, you need more light in the sensor, so you're going to open up your aperture. Now where this becomes an issue is when you're shooting in bright sunny days. If you're shooting at like an f2.8 on a bright sun right overhead, what you're gonna have to do is crank up your shutter speed. And so balancing out these two becomes the issue. And so the solution to this is ND filters. And the function of an ND filter is essentially the same thing as sunglasses. You put it on the lens and it's gonna make it darker. So an ND filter is going to allow you to shoot at wide open apertures and keep your shutter speed down so that you can get more cinematic looking footage. If you don't care about cranking up your shutter speed, then you can just use that and you don't have to worry about ND filters. However, if you want to make things look cinematic, then you're gonna wanna use an ND filter, a big open aperture, and you're gonna want your shutter speed at double that of your frame rate. And then next, we're gonna talk about ISO and why it's important to keep your ISO lower and not crank up your ISO as well.
Now, what in the world is ISO? Well, basically, it's the measure of your camera's ability to capture light. And so I'm gonna try to draw an imaginary graph over here. So a low ISO number like ISO 100 is suitable for conditions like filming at noon or in the desert, basically really bright conditions, where a higher number like ISO 3200 is suitable for filming in low light situations like at night or in a dark room. Now, obviously your ISO is going to be dependent on your shutter speed settings, your aperture settings, and obviously the environment that you'll be filming in. But generally speaking, your ISO should be set between ISO 100 and ISO 3200. Anything beyond 3200 for any camera, no matter what camera you have, would result in some sort of noise, and you don't want that. For example, so I'm just gonna increase the aperture, something crazy like f22, and obviously it's very dark, and so let's go ahead and increase the ISO to something crazy. Let's go 32,000. Okay, so now I've adjusted my camera to a crazy ISO number. I think it's set to ISO 32,000. That's pretty high. You should see some noise. Actually, you should see a lot of noise in the image, and it doesn't look very good. I got proper motion blur. That's great, but now the whole image is ruined because of all that all that noise. Okay, let's bring it back. All right, and we're back. And so now I'm at ISO 400, which is an ISO that I like. You don't see too much noise at all, but it exposes the image right. And so again, setting your ISO is going to be dependent on the other settings of your camera and the conditions and environment that you're in. But generally speaking, try to keep it between 100 and 3200.
All right, so let's dive into focus. Getting onto manual focus is super important so that you don't have fluctuating focus where it's like going to the background, going to the foreground, going to me, going off me. Right now I'm shooting manual focus because in this setting, it makes sense for me to just keep the camera on manual. I'm not moving around. The reason that you would use autofocus is if you are in a situation where things are constantly changing and you don't really have time to set up the camera and give yourself a few seconds to really lock in your focus. So when it comes to focus, there's a couple things that you need to think about. One is what aperture are you shooting at? Right now I'm shooting at a 1.7. So when I'm shooting at a 1.7, my depth of field is gonna be super narrow. That's how I get like blurry background, blurry foreground. And there's gonna be what's called a critical focus. And your critical focus is basically the sharpest point in the image. Now, if you're shooting at a super shallow depth of field, the parts that are in focus is gonna be much smaller. So I could take a step back and all of a sudden I'm gonna be out of focus. Whereas if I was shooting at a much larger aperture, so I wanted to put it at like an f16 or an f22, more of the image is gonna be in focus. So I could move forwards and backwards and I would still be in focus. Your critical focus, where it's the sharpest, is still the same. However, at larger apertures, more is in focus on either side of that critical distance. So when it comes to shooting manual focus, it comes down to just practicing. And it also comes down to understanding the situation that you're in. If you have a moment to set up your focus and you know that your subject is not going to be moving around a lot, then you want to set it to manual. Because if you're on autofocus, what could happen is it could fluctuate. And this is a problem that you're going to run into. Your focus will bounce back and forth. And it doesn't look very professional if your focus is bouncing all over the place. And also you have to think about lighting because in different situations, your focus just might not work that well. So a couple tricks to make focusing easier. Number one is just keep the camera at an arm's stretch away. So when I'm doing my talking head stuff, I'm always within arm's reach so I can control the focus. That's because I'm by myself, I don't have anyone else to help me. If you had a person that could step in here and then you walk behind camera, you could set the focus to the person here and then, switch out if you're doing talking head yourself, or if you're just, shooting the subject, make sure that you give yourself a minute to set your focus. The worst thing you could do is be doing like an interview or talking head like this and all of a sudden the focus snaps off to something in the background and then the rest of your footage just looks like garbage. So if you're vlogging and you're walking around, you're most likely gonna wanna shoot autofocus because things happen so fast and it's not a super controlled situation. But anytime where you can set your focus, I highly suggest putting it on manual. My second tip is when you're trying to figure out your focus, push it further past what you think is your critical focus. So I always focus further and purposefully throw the object out of focus and then bring it back into focus. And the reason that I overshoot my focus and then bring it back is that then I can see where the critical focus is, move past that, and then bring it back to the critical focus. Because if you don't do this step and you're just trying to focus into your object, you might be setting your critical focus actually a little bit in front of where you actually want the focus to be. And then when you put your footage on a big screen, all of a sudden you notice that it's a little bit soft. So that's just one technique to really dial in your focus, push it past, and then bring it back. And it really just takes practice and it takes just doing it. And that's how you're gonna get good at shooting at manual focus.
And last but not least, white balance. You want to make sure that your camera has proper white balance when you're filming your scene. Now, if there's anything that you can take away from this video is that do not use auto white balance. The reason why you don't want to use auto white balance is because when the camera goes from inside to outside, or if they pick up some greens and blues, the colors in the camera are going to shift and it's going to look really weird. It might be subtle at first, but definitely if you're going from inside to outside, it's gonna be very noticeable and it's not gonna look very good at all. So when possible, try to film at a consistent white balance. Right now I've set my white balance to daylight because my key light, which is the Aperture 120D, is set to daylight, which is 5600 Kelvin. And with that color temperature, my camera is also set at that temperature so that the colors that you see is exposed properly. In most cameras, you'll see presets like daylight, tungsten, and a bunch of other options. If you're filming outdoors, out in daylight, then make sure to use the daylight preset. Or if you're inside and there's lamps all around, which are generally tungsten bulbs, then you want to make sure to use the tungsten preset. So for example, like I said before, the white balance on my camera is set to daylight. But what if I change the white balance to, I don't know, tungsten? Let's see what happens. Okay, so now I've adjusted my camera where my white balance is set to incandescent, and as you can see, it looks bluish. It does look kind of cool, but it's not the image that I'm going for. And the reason why is because my light source is set to daylight at 5500 Kelvin. So all in all, whatever color temperature your main light source is, make sure to set that same white balance in your camera. A lot of cameras, if not all cameras, also have this feature called custom white balance. And basically what that does is that if you get a white piece of paper, do I have one? Oh, that's not fully white. Well, close enough. So imagine this is entirely white. You place this bad boy in front of the camera. You set that white balance to that card. From there, the camera will adjust its own settings based on the conditions that you're in and will set for a proper white balance. But that's a little more advanced for some people. But if you do want to use custom white balance, then that's what you got to do. Now, mind you, it doesn't have to be a white card or a white piece of paper. Anything white will do. A white shirt, a white car. Basically, try to be resourceful and look for something white if you want to use the custom white balance feature.
So understanding these 5 elements and getting off of auto and switching to manual is really gonna benefit you as a creator. When I first started playing around with cameras, what I would do is I would take one of these elements and I'd really focus on it. I'd play around with the aperture or play around with the shutter speed and just go out and shoot a ton of tests and just force myself to try all the different settings and really see the difference between each. Now, I highly suggest you do something similar. You can put your camera in aperture priority mode. You can put it in shutter priority mode. And in those modes, what happens is you can control one element and everything else is auto. So if you put your camera in aperture priority, basically you're only controlling your aperture and all of your other settings will be dialed in automatically. This is a great way to learn how aperture is going to affect your image. The same thing with shutter speed. And you can also just turn your ISO off of auto and just dial in your ISO and really play around and see what happens when you crank that ISO up super high and where you start really seeing a ton of noise in your image. So I challenge you to take this video and use that same methodology to learn all of the features of your camera. Start with shutter speed, then move on to aperture, then move on to ISO, focus, and white balance, and just play around with that one setting until you understand the differences between cranking it up, cranking it down, changing your white balance. Play around with it, shoot a ton of footage, go back into your editing, edit it, go back out, shoot. It's gonna take time, but going through this process is really gonna help you understand how to actually use your camera properly so that when you get out there and there's a situation where the auto is just not working properly or you wanna get a specific look, you know exactly what to dial in your camera to make it happen. All right, guys, the next video to the series is gonna be down below in the description, and it's also gonna be here on the end screen. It's gonna be over on Sydney's channel. He's got an awesome channel, and I highly suggest if you haven't seen any of his other videos, you go check those out as well. All right, guys, that's it. I will see you over there.